It has been quite a number of weeks since I recorded an episode of the Initiatrix, and hand on heart, it feels like about several years since I sat down to do this and to speak with you. Up until now, I don't think I've shared much of what led me to this point or even who I am. And to be honest, I wasn't entirely sure whether I wanted to. I don't believe you have to share your past to be relatable or vulnerable. I also don't believe you need to fillet yourself for the world, for other people to get a better understanding of who you be and how you come to be who you are in the world. I don't believe it's necessary at all. But what I do believe and what I do know to be true is this: the more I personally try to fight against and be in resistance of sharing more of my heart, more of my journey, more of who I am, the more I struggle to be all of who I am. The more I struggle to be all of me, the more my heart aches, the more my soul weeps. I am a storyteller. I am an artist, I am a creator, I am a creative, and sharing my heart and art with the world is part of who I am and what I came here to do. And so today's episode is going to give you a little insight into me, Sinéad Cracknell, mother, daughter, sister, friend, lover, leader, visionary, CEO, woman. I was recently interviewed by someone for the show, and in all honesty, the entire interview was such a huge catalyst for me. It shone so many lights on where I had still been abdicating personal power and shying away from my authentic expression and truth. It showed me where I was still dancing around the merry-go-round that is the victim, savior, persecutor triangle, which is really an expression of the distorted program that is designed to keep us in savior, suffer, sacrifice, and moving from a space of fear. But more on this little deep dive down the rabbit hole another day. It showed me where I was still moving from disempowered feminine energy and what was being required of me to be able to become more embodied in my woman, in my leader, in my queen archetype and energy. And it was truly fascinating to me to have this awareness being reflected back to me. And it always makes me smile when things like this happen. When we're given these opportunities to check in to see where we are internally, what's going on in our internal landscape, and where else or what else might be required to shift or pivot within ourselves. And up until that moment, I had been on a major ego death, a true journey of alchemy. And this little encounter, I can safely say, was divinely orchestrated to allow me to see precisely where there was more room for growth, more room for evolution, more room for me to alchemize some of the tendrils of myself that I really didn't like to see within myself, things that weren't serving me, things that weren't necessarily going to be useful with where I'm heading. And so I'm truly, truly grateful and appreciative of the experience, as I always am. And I always like to take these experiences and really dive deep into the understanding and awareness that I'm being gifted with in those moments. And I know that I'm not giving you the whole backstory or the context around the who, what, where, when, how, and why. But let me tell you this. It was truly and definitely something that became an inspiration and motivation to continue to press pause on the podcast instead of record and play. So let me take you on a little bit of a journey inside of me, inside of my world, inside of who I am and what led me to this very moment, and to tell you more about what my mission is, what I am here to do. And I think that up until this point, inclusive of this experience, I don't think I was really certain. I think that I had to go through this entire ego death this past few months to really anchor in deeply what I'm passionate about doing, who I'm passionate about being, and to release and dissolve anything further that's really, really not desirable to say, for want of a better word. So let me share with you now. If you're new to my world and you're new to this podcast, you probably won't know that around 3.5 years ago, I decided to pack up my entire life, my daughter, our 2 dogs, to fulfill our childhood dream and move to Ireland. But the truth is, I wasn't just following a dream. I was following my heart. I was following my heart and soul. I was following the internal guidance of my soul. And I made the decision that I was no longer willing to settle. And I made the decision to show myself and my daughter what else is possible when you really take steps to no longer settle for a life that you are unhappy in, and what it would be like to change everything and consciously design and live a life that I truly wanted to live and a life that I desired. And so I was showing my daughter and showing myself what else was possible and what it would be like to move in the direction of fear and do the thing that I had promised myself I would do for years. Moving to Ireland took me on a journey of deep, nourishing healing. It took me on a journey of descendants into the body, a dissolution of ancestral and transgenerational trauma, a healing of the feminine and the mother wound and the father wound, a healing from deep trauma created and carved into the body by both, and an awakening of the heart and a reconnection and restoration of the soul. And from the moment I got on the boat, or we got on the boat, to sail across the Irish Sea to our new home, I promised myself that we would never return to England, to my childhood home again. And we didn't. My father passed the same year that we moved here, and that was the only time that we had revisited the childhood home until July of this year. Surprisingly and completely unexpectedly, I received an intuitive nudge and guidance from upstairs, from the divine, to book flights back home to the UK. And so I did immediately. When my intuition nudges, when the divine calls, I listen, I decide, and I move. And the entire trip felt like a pilgrimage. And it was like I hadn't been back on home turf and soil for at least 10 years and probably longer. It honestly felt like I hadn't been there for years. And it was like a soothing balm for my soul. I got to remember so many memories from my childhood, from my past, that I had honestly had forgotten, that I had suppressed, that I had chosen to dissociate from. And I got to make peace with it all, to make peace with the past, to forgive and let go of past versions of myself, past experiences, and really just release anything that is like the weight and the burden of who I used to be and who I had to become to be able to navigate my life up until we moved to Ireland. And it took until July of this year to realize that I was safe to let it all go now, that it was safe for me to go home, that it was safe for me to go back into that house, and that I was strong enough and powerful enough to face it all. And it really made me realize just so much about who I am, the woman I have become, and how this all is infused into the business that I have birthed and created, the legacy that I am building, the movement that I am carving out. And I realized that I had drawn from several sources of influence when it came to learning how to run my business. And it's not necessarily something that you would automatically recognize when you build and start a soul-led, heart-led business, heart-centered business, is that so much of what you're creating is based on family and how you navigated within the dynamic of family and who you were within the dynamic of family and who your role models were and how they operated and how they managed the business of family, because family is the business of the heart also. And so one of the major influences on me creating my business, and the thing that had the most impact, was, and I say the thing, it's not really a thing at all, it's the mother and the other women in my lineage, the women who came before me, and the women who I grew up around, and the women who are still standing beside me today, watching and learning through osmosis, through the ancestral line, from every single woman, how they have hustled and grind and done it all themselves, managing a family unit, managing a household, tending to everyone's needs. And this truly is the business of the heart. And when we are, and this is what I watched and what I learned, that when we're so giving to others all of the time, no matter what, we lose sight of ourselves. And without a second glance, the women around me and who came before me took on the role of mother, of father, of nurturer, of provider, of protector, of caregiver, to all that walked through the door of their homes. Those that laid their heads down to rest, and those that simply popped in to say hello. The women that came before me were and are ruthless and savvy high achievers who did whatever the fuck they needed to do to make sure that everything ran like clockwork, that everything was just so, that everything that was organized and right and just, and everything was under control. Emotions, housework, who needed to be where and when, all of it. And sometimes, more often than not, the women who came before me were abusive. They had learned to become heartless and thoughtless. But I know in my heart of hearts that they always did the best they could based on the knowledge and wisdom available to them at the time. And having this deep understanding that asking questions and getting curious about what else might be possible wasn't really something that was cultivated or nurtured within them for them to be able to do safely, confidently, and easily. If anything, they didn't have time for that. They didn't have time to dream. They didn't have time to imagine or wonder even. And the men, the masculine role that was around them provided financially, but they were barely around. They were absent a lot of the time, unless they were sick and also needing to be cared for. So the woman and the women always took care of everything, no matter what. And they often felt abandoned, and they often felt overwhelmed, and they often felt tired as fuck. But they didn't allow themselves to feel any of that. They didn't ever stop to take a breath. They never really complained. And even when they were in pain, they carried on regardless. They put themselves last, and the business of family always came first. And they were, and still are, wired to work hard, to struggle alone, to sacrifice themselves, their dreams, their goals, their aspirations in every which way possible, and to see themselves as hopeless, powerless, and helpless. Although I know damn well that not one of them would ever care to admit this. But they were always working so hard, always believing that the harder they worked, the easier it would be in the long run. But the truth was, it never was. They settled in life, in love, and for years of struggle and sacrifice, financially, they gave their power away over and over and over because that was the dumb thing. They moved from a space of fear. They never asked what else might be possible for them. They never asked for more. They never followed through on exploring whether there was more that available to them or for them. And maybe this is something that you can relate to. Maybe this is something that you've seen in your own life from the women that have come before you, where they're always constantly giving and giving and giving and never allowing themselves a moment to receive just because they can, just because they want to. And I know for me, it took a lot for me to allow myself to receive support. And as taking on the role as mother, I had to learn to do things differently. I didn't just have to, I actually chose to. So when it came to building my own business of the heart, being a mother, building the legacy and movement that I'm creating through my work, I knew that I was being called to more. I knew that I was being called to dissolve what had already been passed through the generations for eons and begin something brand new that had never been done before. And perhaps this story is familiar to you, and perhaps you can relate to it deeply. And if you don't, that's okay too. But these are the gifts and the initiations we are being called to when we are called to birth our heart and soul-led businesses. And this whole experience over this past nearly 2 months now has made me recognize and become deeply committed and devoted to what I'm here to do and what I've decided for myself. And that is making it my mission to support as many women and mothers to let it be easy. We've been told that it has to be hard. And when it's hard, we feel rewarded. And when it gets to be easy, we don't even know what easy is. We don't even know what rest is truly. Most of us think we're resting, but we're really not. We're resting with one eye open. So coming out of this deep metamorphosis and alchemy and ascending out of the cocoon that I had recently been in, I've been really deepening my connection with the masculine, with God, with the divine. And I really need to be reminded of who I am and what I've chosen for myself, the decisions that I've made for myself. And I want to share with you some of the things that I was reminded of. And perhaps you can relate to some of this as well. I am the first woman in my lineage that has fully learned to trust and lean into the divine for provision and protection outside of religion. I am the first woman in my lineage to break cycles of moving from disempowered feminine energy and do it all just because I can. I am the first woman in my lineage to embark on the healing from deep traumatic experiences. The first to dive deep into the abyss and the unknown, even when it scared the bejesus out of me. The first to break patterns and themes of codependency, victim, savior, and persecutor. The first woman in my lineage to follow her heart, not settle for anything less than she desires and deserves. The first woman in my lineage to become a solo mama and both parents, which made for initiation after initiation to become the embodied feminine. The first woman in my lineage to call in support and receive it just because I wanted it, and it is a non-negotiable. The first woman to support other women and generate 30 million plus in and outside of their businesses. The first woman to activate my inner medicine woman and ancient gifts and abilities so that I could support others to restore their own divinity, connect with their soul through the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual healing. The first woman to speak her absolute heart and soulful truth, even when it's fucking hard. The first woman to keep showing up and deciding to meet my edges, even when I don't like it, because fuck me, don't I like it sometimes. I want it to stop and I wanted to get off the train. But I kept going and I keep going. Even when there's no evidence, even when there's no plan, even when there's no strategy laid out before me. And I could go on. If this story speaks to you and you know that you are ready to take your heart and soul-led business to the next level, if you know that you are ready to lead from your heart, to shift your identity from being the hard-working, the approval-seeking woman to self-sourced leader, by activating more of your own personal power, more of your feminine essence and queen energy and truth, so that you can live a life of ease and fulfillment while making a shit ton of money, so that you are financially fortified, provided and supported. My work is for you. Join me inside of my private community by signing up to my email list below. If today's episode resonated and landed with you, if you noticed a spark of curiosity being ignited, and you would love to step a little closer into my world, I invite you to join myself and other amazing luminaries inside the Initiatrix private community. You can do this by joining the inner circle. I can't wait to see you inside.